The bus stop sat beneath a flickering streetlight, its glow dim and tired, like the city itself. Cold wind swept down the empty road, cutting through layers of clothing and settling deep into bones. He stood near the pole, shoulders hunched, rubbing his hands together to keep feeling in his fingers. His jacket was old, the zipper slightly broken, but it was the one thing he owned that still held warmth. The bus was late again, always late on nights like this, when the air felt heavier and loneliness pressed closer than the cold. That was when he noticed her. She sat on the metal bench, body curled inward as if trying to disappear. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, teeth subtly chattering despite her attempt to stay composed. Her coat was thin, clearly not meant for weather like this, and rain had darkened the fabric at the shoulders. Strands of her hair clung to her face, and exhaustion sat plainly in her eyes. She didn't look homeless. She didn't look helpless. She just looked, worn down, as though the world had taken more from her than it had given back that day. He hesitated. Kindness always came with a cost, and he didn't have much to spare. But the way she shivered made the decision for him. Without a word, he unzipped his jacket and stepped closer. The cold bit instantly into his chest, but he ignored it. "Here," he said gently, holding it out. "You look freezing." She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't realized anyone else existed. For a moment, pride flickered across her face, an instinctive refusal forming on her lips. Then another gust of wind tore through the street, and her resolve broke. She nodded, slowly, and accepted the jacket. When she slipped her arms into it, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but sincere. He gave a small shrug, trying to make it seem like nothing. "It's colder at night. Happens every winter." They stood there together, strangers sharing the same quiet space. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his. The city hummed faintly around them, cars rushing past without slowing, lives crossing without touching. For a few minutes, the silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. When the bus finally arrived, brakes hissing, they boarded together. She reached into her bag to pay, then froze. Her card beeped red, declined. Heat rushed to her face as she tried again, then again. Without thinking, he stepped forward and dropped his coins into the slot. "It's fine," he said before she could protest. "Really?" She looked at him, eyes glistening, not with tears, but with something deeper. Gratitude mixed with disbelief. A few stops later, she stood to leave, still wearing his jacket. "I'll return this," she said, turning back toward him. He smiled, tired but genuine. "Keep it. Sounds like you need it more tonight." The doors closed between them, and as the bus pulled away, he watched her walk into the mist, unaware that the smallest kindness he'd ever given was about to come back and change everything. Morning came gray and restless, the kind that made alarms feel louder and beds harder to leave. He showed up at the construction site just before sunrise, boots crunching over gravel, breath still visible in the cold air. The jacket was gone from his shoulders, and he felt its absence more than he expected. Not because of the cold, but because giving it away had felt like closing a small chapter of his life, one he didn't think about much but somehow carried with him. Something felt off the moment he arrived. Workers stood in clusters instead of heading straight to their tasks. Conversations dropped into whispers. Supervisors paced, checking their watches far too often. A rumor moved faster than the wind between steel beams and unfinished concrete: corporate inspection, new ownership, top-level executives coming in unannounced. For men who lived paycheck to paycheck, surprises like that usually meant trouble. He kept his head down and went to work, hands moving on instinct as his mind wandered. Just before mid-morning, the site fell into an uneasy silence. A black car rolled in slowly, polished and immaculate, completely out of place among dust and rust. Another followed. Then another. Doors opened, and people in tailored coats stepped out, shoes clean enough to reflect the sky. And then she appeared. At first, he didn't recognize her. She stood straighter now, shoulders squared with quiet authority. Her hair was perfectly arranged, her expression calm and unreadable. A long coat draped over her frame, elegant and expensive. Conversation stopped entirely. Someone nearby whispered her name, followed by a title that made his stomach tighten. CEO. His heart dropped hard into his chest. Then her eyes moved across the site, and landed on him. For a brief second, something shifted in her expression. Recognition. Warmth. Gratitude. He felt his face flush and looked away, suddenly embarrassed by his dusty clothes and calloused hands. He hoped she wouldn't say anything. He hoped she'd forgotten him entirely. She didn't. During the meeting, she spoke clearly, confidently, about restructuring, about ethics, about valuing people over numbers. Her voice carried easily across the open space. Then she paused, reaching into her bag. She unfolded something familiar, worn fabric, faded seams. His jacket. A murmur rippled through the workers. Last night, she said, holding it up, I stood at a bus stop feeling invisible. Cold. Alone. This jacket was given to me by someone who had no reason to care, someone who didn't know who I was or what I owned. Her gaze found him again. That matters. Silence wrapped the sight like a held breath. She continued, this company will move forward differently. Compassion is not weakness. It's character. He barely heard the rest. His ears rang, chest tight with something he couldn't name, fear, pride, disbelief. When the meeting ended and people began to disperse, he expected that to be the end of it. But she walked toward him. Up close, her eyes were just as kind as they had been under the streetlight. She handed him the jacket, neatly folded. You didn't ask me anything that night, she said quietly. He shrugged. Didn't think it mattered. She smiled softly. It did. More than you know. And in that moment, standing between steel beams and morning light, he realized that kindness, once given, never really disappears, it only waits for the right moment to return. The days that followed didn't feel real at first. Life at the construction site went on as usual, machines roaring, hammers ringing, dust settling into every crease of his clothes, but something underneath it all had shifted. People spoke a little softer. Supervisors listened a little more. And every so often, he'd catch someone looking at him differently, not with envy, but with a quiet respect that made him uncomfortable. He tried to forget the moment her eyes had met his, tried to tell himself it had been nothing more than coincidence. Kindness didn't usually come back around. Not for people like him. So when he was called into the office a week later, his first thought wasn't opportunity, it was fear. Fear of layoffs. Fear of bad news dressed up in polite words. She was already there when he walked in, standing by the window overlooking the site. Sunlight poured in behind her, casting long shadows across the room. She turned as he entered, her expression calm but warm, the same way it had been that night at the bus stop. Please, sit, she said. He did, hands folded tightly in his lap, heart pounding. She spoke about the company's future, about restructuring teams, about investing in people who showed integrity when no one was watching. Then she slid a folder across the desk toward him. Inside was an offer, training, a supervisory position, steady hours, benefits. A future he'd never allowed himself to imagine. I'm not giving you this because you helped me, she said gently, as if reading his thoughts. I'm giving it to you because the world needs more people like you in places where decisions are made. He swallowed hard, eyes blurring. I was just being human, he said. She nodded. Exactly. Weeks later, winter deepened. The same bus stop still flickered under the tired streetlight. The same cold wind still cut through the night. But now, every evening after work, he stood there waiting, not just for the bus, but for the chance to notice someone else. He carried an extra jacket over his arm. Sometimes he needed it. Sometimes someone else did. And every time he offered it, he never asked names. Never asked stories. Because he had learned something quietly powerful: you never know who someone is, what they carry, or how far a single moment of kindness can travel. It travels farther than money. Farther than titles. Farther than the night. And once given, it always finds its way back.